It's live now, Jenny. Already. Yeah. Oh,
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Metro Inner Development Assessment Panel meeting of the 1st of October 2024. My name is Tony Arias and I'm the presiding member. The other panel members this morning are Lee O'Donoghue, Deputy Presiding Member, Karen Hyde, Specialist Member. In relation to Part B and City of Fremantle, we have Councillor Ingrid Van Dawson and Councillor Andrew Sullivan. And from the DAP Secretariat, we have Laura Simmons and Ashley Kelly. We also have local government officers in attendance and a number of applicants and submitters. So welcome all. So with that, I will formally declare the meeting open at 1:03. I acknowledge that we are hosting this meeting on the traditional land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of Western Australia and pay respects to elders past and present and the ongoing connection between people, land, waters and community. The meeting will be run in accordance with DAP Standing Orders 2024. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the DAP website in accordance with regulations. Panel members may refer to technical devices through the meeting to assist them in considering the information. Item 2's apologies, we have nil. Item 3, members on leave of absence, we have nil. Item 4, noting of minutes, just that's for information that minutes of previous DAP meetings are on the DAP website. So we move to Part B of the agenda, which is City of Fremantle, and Item 1, declarations of due consideration. Members, I ask you to duly declare that you considered all the documentation in Part B of the agenda and Part B of related information. As part of that, there's obviously been a significant number of submissions. So if you're able to make that declaration by raising your hand, thank you, or duly declared. Item 2 is disclosures of interest. Members, are there declarations to be made? Councillor?
I'd like to make an impartiality interest declaration. In my role as elected member at Fremantle Council, we considered this application at the council meeting back in early September. And we consulted with I personally consulted with the community. I attended a site meeting with some adjoining neighbours and also emailed them following the council meeting just to let them know how to apply to request a meeting at the DAP, which they weren't aware of that process, like how to put in a presentation request. So I gave them that information after the council meeting, but as a DAP member, confirming I'm not bound by any previous decision or resolution of council. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, presiding member. I'd like to also make the virtual exact same impartiality interest declaration as I submitted in writing to the Secretariat.
Thank you. In relation to both declarations, consistent with the standing orders, I'm prepared to approve participation in the meeting and voting on the item based on those declarations. Thank you. Members, are there any other declarations to be made? Thank you. In which case, we move to item 3, which is the Form 1 DAP applications, and item 3.1, which is Lot 8, Essex Street, Fremantle, and it's for a 4-storey tourist development. We have a number of presentations, a considerable number of presentations to be made. I will remind presenters that presentations are 3 minutes, and given the number of presenters, when 3 minutes is up, I will ask you to conclude. I will also add that the members have made a declaration that they duly considered it. So in the interest of getting your points across, I'd suggest you focus on those elements that are most critical. Can I also add, consistent with standing orders, the expectation that all presenters consider and act in a respectful manner. Clearly, there's a difference of opinion, and I would ask everyone to bear that in mind. Thank you. So, the first presenter is Jacqueline Van Den.
Yes, and to change to the next slide. Hello everyone, my name's Jacqueline Van Der Ven.
You're welcome to sit down.
Is it all right?
If you want to stand, up to you.
No, I'm happy to sit. Thank you.
Sit down.
This is our home at 26 to 28 Norfolk Street. Our home is 1-storey facing Norfolk Street with a second basement level leading to our garden. It's also 2 separate houses with 2 separate titles. We live in number 26 and we're currently fitting out number 28 for rental. Number 26 directly abuts the subject site and both are state heritage listed. Our home's 162 years old, one of the oldest in Fremantle. And this is Lilo, according to the applicant, except it isn't. It's a little bit different for us. For us, this is Lilo. Despite a directive to assess the Fremantle Tech College, our home on Norfolk Street and the Port Flour Mill, the Heritage Impact Statement doesn't even include a single word about the flour mill. It's been entirely omitted. To add insult to injury, it's referred to 10 times within the objection section. Why would you refer a concern about the flour mill to a heritage statement that doesn't even acknowledge it exists? They may as well refer to an old phone book because at least that has the flour mill in it. That's just the concluding statements in the Heritage Impact Statement showing it doesn't address the flour mill. The Waste Management Plan also overlooks its residents, stating the site is surrounded solely by commercial properties. 20 residents' homes are just ignored. There are more residences than commercial properties by about 4 to 1. This image very accurately shows our waste management problems. This image was supplied by the applicant themselves. We didn't just wait around until it looked this way. It looks like this all the time. You can see here the rubbish overflowing and it blows into our private right of way. These are industrial sized bins and left in the access way 24/7. Earlier this year, a bin was set alight, requiring the attendance of the fire brigade, and the damage to the Salvos building can be seen. It blocks access when the bins are all across there to the Salvo's roller door and access to their own bins. In the report, it says there's a two-way access to the developer's site, but that is our own private right of way there to the left. When the Salvos want to access their roller door or their bin area, they then drag those bins out into the middle of that area. Then when 19 Essex Street want access to theirs, they usually push them into our right of way. And then when we want access our own private right of way, we push the bins back and it goes round and round and round like that. We've complained to council many, many times about this situation. The current plan now, as I understand it, is that Lilo staff will ferry these bins from their site to the Norfolk Lane verge. I'd just like to point out there is no verge on Norfolk Lane, so they'd be dragging bins backwards and forwards to this non-existent verge from their own area, blocking access in Norfolk Street.
Jacqueline, I will ask you to conclude if you can, please.
The waste report did not include the existing tenants' bins, which were ignored. The Flaming Galah alone has an industrial size bin and 2 regular bins with no provision for its storage or collection. They're proposed to be dragged through open air service corridors so as not to disturb guests. But what about us? We'll be listening to the bins being dragged and emptied all hours of the day and night. So I'd like this to be an opportunity to fix this problem and not to worsen it.
Thank you, Jacqueline. If you stay there, it's an opportunity for questions. Members, are there questions?
I have a question. Just about you say that it's our own private right of way.
Yes.
Can you explain that? I haven't got a aerial photograph I know where it is, but I'm just trying to work out.
So
it's
not
part of
very
your
clear to see, is it? But
I'm sorry,
yes.
can you look at us when you speak? Sorry, that's okay.
That area on the left where the car is, that's a right of way that services our 2 properties. And so 28, 26, 24 and 22. So that is shared.
It's private. It's noted on the title in that way, or I'm just trying to work out what it's
Yes.
So, okay. So there's a problem, there's an existing problem with your waste disposal.
Yeah, all the bins are currently dragged sort of willy-nilly all through that area. So we quite often get blocked access. Well, we have to move the industrial size bins out of the way. We prefer not to do that. We'd like to see them have it on their own property.
So your concern is that with the development of the site, this problem will be exacerbated?
Yes, because you can see all the bins stacked along there, and there's going to be many, many more bins with this new development. It's just not feasible to keep the bins in the access way. It's not feasible now with just a small number of tenants, and once we have close to 300 people in that building with 5 extra industrial size bins, there's just no facility for storage in that area. And also the fact that they say they're going to ferry the bins to the verge for collection. But
that's along Norfolk Lane, is that correct?
Yes, and there is no verge on Norfolk Lane. It's only footpath, so those bins certainly can't be stored on the footpath. It's the only footpath to on Norfolk Lane.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions?
Thank you for your presentation. I had a similar question, but presiding member, I might ask the local government when it's that time.
Okay.
Similarly, thank you.
Thank you.
Jacqueline, thank you. The next presenter, Frank van de Ven.
I'll just change the slides if that's all right.
Thank you. My name's Frank van der Ven, Jacqueline's husband. A home has been a home for 162 years. Our garden and our veranda are as important to us as the house. This is a place that has hosted weddings and family celebrations where we enjoy dinner in summer. 24 operable windows that overlook our private garden is intrusive and will inhibit our enjoyment of our home. The developer uses the term 246 beds and 246 guests interchangeably throughout the application. Looking at the room plan, up to 286 guests can be accommodated. This does not include the proposed bar, which could add a further 100 people in the building. The noise will be constant and incessant. Having 24 operable windows overlooking us is a nightmare. 24 windows open with 286 backpackers, noise 24 hours a day. There is no setback on our shared boundary. All view of the sky will be gone from our home. The shadowing report is flawed. The report has used the combined square meterage of both 26 and 28 Norfolk Street in their calculations when used to assess impact on number 26 Norfolk Street. Whilst we currently occupy both 26 and 28, they should be considered as separate residences as they are over two separate titles, either of which we can deal with independent of the other. Given both blocks and houses are of similar square meterage, the figures the developer has provided should be at least double. The shadowing report provides figures of 556 square metres for a total land area for both 26 and 28, and further states 34 square metres of 26 is affected by shading, a percentage of 6.1%. This total site area, the total site area of land at 26 is in fact 278 square metres. Therefore, the percentage of 12.2 metres squared is more accurate. This is a fundamental error, and one is left to ponder how many other errors have been made in this development application. Moreover, for the shadow to reach the house, it has covered our entire backyard and our outbuildings, both of which have not been considered. I submit that the percentage of our house and land affected by shading is far greater than that indicated on the report. Shadowing is important to us as our limestone home suffers from moisture retention and rising damp. This is a monstrous development, the biggest pod-style development in Australia. The Brisbane Lilo consists of 81 pods and, more importantly, is appropriately located in a commercial area surrounded by high-rise, not multiple heritage-listed properties. The Gold Coast Lilo consists of 121 pods and 13 parking spaces, and again is located in a suitable context, surrounded by high-rise buildings. The Fremantle development immediately abuts 20 people's homes, being of either one or two-storey construction. The developer uses the terms harmonious and sensitive in its application, yet we can see nothing either harmonious or sensitive in these images. In conclusion, we avail ourselves of the National Trust Advocacy Services when we found out about the development. They have supplied the letter, which hopefully you have within your documentation, in which it states that the impact on our home and Norfolk streetscape will be great, and strongly feel the 4-storey should not be approved. They also suggest a review of the building design stating its unsuitability and address the impact on the flour mill, something the applicant completely ignored. If anything, we would like to see the existing building shape and form extended and for adequate setbacks to be given for the sake of our privacy and enjoyment of our home. Please give us the consideration of not having backpacker windows open to our private space and not having 24/7 bin noise carrying into our home. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Next presenter, Karen Germain.
My own presentation. I'm speaking on behalf of other people, so. Yeah. Okay.
I'm the owner of 815 The Old Flour Mill, adjacent to 19 Essex Street. My fragile landmark cottage, an A1 heritage building listed by the National Trust, has received morning sun for 162 years. The overshadowing documentation in the DA is flawed, and it does not show that the sun is going to be prevented from shining on this building if this development goes ahead. The developers state that the DA is a commercial area, ignoring residents abutting the development. The old flour mill isn't documented at all in the heritage impact statement, and the imposing development imposes a huge risk to amenity, particularly to the 20 residential properties that directly abut the DA. The unprecedented high-density design will impact on 38 residences and 5 businesses proximate to the site. Issues associated with noise, visual impact, overshadowing, height, density, and risk of structural damage to adjacent heritage buildings is not adequately addressed. The site has been seriously overdeveloped on the existing first floor with 184 pods. The average space per person is 2.5 square metres. With no lounging area in these pod rooms, we could end up with schoolers on tap. The equivalent of 7 Year 12 classes socialising on site 24/7 with nowhere to rest inside their rooms. Where are they going to go? How is this going to be managed? There's been no effort to reduce the impact of noise from a 24/7 operation, along with the risk of antisocial behaviour on neighbours. A full house plus bar patrons could see this site holding well over 400 people, which is a massive overload for this site. There's been no attempt to control the noise from the back of house, service corridors, bin rooms, bar, kitchen and communal dining, which all abut residential properties. There's been no consideration. They have been placed right next to these residential homes. Already a high traffic area due to nearby traffic destinations, increases in traffic will add to volume and circulation problems. Additional vehicles in the area will be a major issue whether guests have cars or not, as Essex Street will be a pick-up or drop-off area, creating risk for car and pedestrian accidents. The rear 4-storey abuts many neighbouring residential properties and the sheer scale is totally out of character for the area. Overlooking, overshadowing and noise will majorly impact on neighbouring properties, including my place. Window setbacks need to be increased to comply with residential design codes to preserve our privacy. The stacked, rusting shipping containers look might be fitting for Freo Port, but is totally out of character for this area. Based on these serious matters, I don't see how this DA can be approved. Balancing residential with commercial and respecting heritage values and landscapes which are quintessential Fremantle, developers need to work with residents to retain the character of Fremantle and to respect the residents that live there. And I'd just like to finish with, in 162 years, it's unlikely that tourists will be peering through the gates like they do the old flour mill to admire 19 Essex Street. Rather, they will be questioning what happened to the social experiment using jail-like rooms for accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Members, questions?
Thank you for your presentation.
I'm happy to have a break for a minute. Or do you want me to do it straight away?
I
I can go.
We can swap you around, that's fine. I don't mind. I'm
So
here.
Karen, you're doing another presentation
So
on behalf of-
we employed a town planner who did a report and I'm just doing a summary. It'll be within the 3 minutes and that was tabled, so you would have all read the.
So would you prefer to have a little
No,
break?
I'm here now, so
Yeah.
that's
Well, why
okay.
don't you continue on?
all right, not a problem.
We just thought it would be easier.
Yeah,
I'm fine
So on behalf of SJB Town Planning and Urban Design, this is an objection on behalf of surrounding residents, and we also represent 5 businesses directly in the area as well. The locality is a mix of residential and commercial land uses. 20 residential properties abut the site to the west, southwest, south and southeast, and there are significant impacts on these residential land uses, including heritage, noise, car and bicycle parking, traffic, visual impact, privacy, side and rear setbacks, antisocial behaviour and waste disposal. The residential land users abutting the subject site were not recognised, this is a common theme, in design briefs and even on the heritage impact statement, and this explains the lack of consideration of issues of height, bulk, scale and positioning of kitchens, bars, service corridors. We have reviewed the proposed DA plans and supporting documents and undertaken our own assessment. This includes assessment against the City of Fremantle Local Planning Scheme Number 4, Planning Area Policies, Residential Design Codes, Clause 67(2) of the Deemed Provisions, Planning and Development, Local Planning Schemes, Regulations 2015, and Statement of Planning Policy 7, Design of the Built Environment. Importantly, the proposed development does not comply with the aims of the LPS4, the aims of the city centre zone, and the objectives of the city centre local planning area. Specifically, the proposed 4-storey section of the development does not comply with the height limit, where development over 2 storeys is only permitted where the criterion clause 1.2 of the local planning area is addressed. The development does not satisfy the criterion clause 1.2 and therefore cannot be supported over 2 storeys. In addition, the design principles under SPP 7.0, Design for the Built Environment, are not achieved. All development is required under the policy to be assessed against this policy. The development does not achieve all of the design criteria and as such, again, cannot be approved. Lastly, the proposed development does not satisfy the criteria for the development under clause 67(2) under the Planning and Development Local Planning Scheme Regulations 2005. It is important to note the clause 67(2) of the Deemed Provisions requires local government to have due regard to the matters listed under that clause. Due regard means to properly consider these matters. As outlined above, the matters listed under clause 67(2) have not been given careful and proper consideration, and until such time as they have, the development cannot be approved, let alone even be considered. The above assessment shows the application does not comply with the above documents and is not capable of being approved and therefore should not be approved. Thank you.
Karen, are you able to respond to questions or not?
If there's I will try. Unfortunately, Simon couldn't. He was going to present at the last one, but then he couldn't be here for this one. So if there's any questions, I will try.
We'll see how you go.
Okay.
Members, are there questions? No?
No, thankfully.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
The next presenter is Alexander Temenikos, and Laurie Tremaine is reading submission.
Yes, thank you. So my name's Laurie Tremaine, and I'm speaking on behalf of a neighbour, Alex Temenikos. And so I'm speaking in his words. So as architect and developer of a neighbouring property and owner of 2 units at 20 Norfolk Street, I formally object to the proposed DA. With over 50 years of local development experience, I'm profoundly disappointed by the sheer disregard shown for neighbouring properties, particularly in regards to natural light, cross ventilation and overall built form. 20 Norfolk Street was carefully curated, balancing a mixture of shared and private courtyards, allowing for fresh airflow and sunlight to permeate living spaces. This sensitivity to the environment and neighbours is totally absent in the proposed DA. After consulting with owners in my complex, I fully support the objections from SJB Town Planning and Planning Horizons to the DA. I see 3 main issues. Firstly, visual impact. The southern portion of the proposed development is 3.075 metres from the boundary and subsequent courtyards at 20 Norfolk Street. The building is 13.77 metres high and is highly intrusive for residential properties in the vicinity, including my own. The design ignores the established context where no other buildings of similar height exist, creating a discordant and overwhelming presence. Such a sheer wall directly on the boundary obstructs views, blocks natural light, and has an oppressive visual impact on neighbouring properties. A more considerate and appropriate design response should step back the upper floors to minimise this impact. This insensitivity is compounded by the lack of acknowledgement of adjacent residences, which should have been a key consideration in the design. Secondly, privacy. The 4-storey section includes multiple windows directly overlooking residential properties. Setbacks of 3.075 metres from the western boundary and 3.73 metres from the southern boundary severely impact neighbours' privacy. Thirdly, setbacks. Proposed setbacks are inadequate and inappropriate given proximity to residential properties. The southern boundary setbacks range from 0.32 metres to 3.73 metres for a building that stands 13.77 metres tall. The minimal setbacks proposed will significantly degrade the amenity of surrounding residences, particularly in terms of visual privacy and access to natural light and cross ventilation. In conclusion, the DA is insensitive to its context and neighbouring properties. It fails to address key considerations of visual impact, privacy, and appropriate setbacks. This requires a redesign that respects neighbouring residences, applying the standards and principles that are vital for a balanced and harmonious community. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. Yeah, given it's not your submission, I'm not sure it's appropriate for you to respond.
I can relate well to the points that are made in that.
You also presenting Jill Smith's presentation, is that?
No, we're not. No, we're not going to.
Okay.
No Jill here? No, Jill, no, sorry.
Okay. So Jill's not presenting?
No, we'll just do it as a written submission. Jill is in the same, so Alex's response is on behalf of the 5 abutting residences in the development at 20 Norfolk Street.
Okay, so we'll take Jill's presentation or submission as a written submission. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's not Linda. We don't have to Linda. No.
Okay.
Just confirming Linda, no Linda. So she's will be written as well.
Okay. So Katrina Gregg. Sorry.
I'm glad to know I'm not reading all of this. I'm just summarising. So,
No problem.
my name is Katrina Gregg. I'm representing the Council of Owners for 15 to 17 Essex Street. I'll read some of it because it'll make it simpler. So, the owners of 15 to 17 Essex Street are concerned that the proposal does not essentially acknowledge at all that 15 to 17 Essex Street has any bearing on the site. It is immediately adjacent. The back wall of 17 Essex Street actually is the boundary to the proposed site, so there's no setback to that, obviously. 15 Essex Street is a heritage listed 1A classification, so the highest level of listing, and was built in 1862, has no foundations because it's limestone, like the other buildings in Norfolk Street. So it is a really huge concern that the heritage assessments provided for the development did not even acknowledge the existence of 15 to 17 Essex Street, and in particular, the very significant value of 15 Essex Street, the original flour mill building. In addition to that, the fact that it is comprised of 15 separate apartment units, 12 of which contain residences, one of which is the only short-term accommodation permitted on the site, which is otherwise restricted by strata to only that unit, which is 317 Essex Street. And for the very same reasons that we've been concerned, which is the noise and generally uncontrolled, not entirely neighbourly behaviour that you will get from an all-night venue. So that's primarily the concern. The heritage, the absence of acknowledgement of the heritage value of the adjacent buildings, 26 to 28 Norfolk Street and 15 to 17 Essex Street, from the review of heritage value is astounding. The only heritage that was really noted was the very minimal, relatively speaking, value of 19 Essex Street. So it's omitted, perhaps, the adjacent buildings, which is a shame. So further to that, the location and surrounding areas are already part of a vibrant inner city bar, restaurant and character locality. The city centre vicinity of the proposed development and historic West End has in fact a variety of options available, including in 2022, 130 licensed venues. The high density of occupation, transients and 24 access proposed for this new development is out of keeping with a well-established dynamic existing environment. The proposal describes itself as being, amongst other things, authentic and local. One of our concerns is the picture on the front of this architectural report that describes that exact phrase shows, in fact, not the building at all. It shows the heritage listed Warders cottages in a completely different street. So there's a lack of genuineness about that, basically. So the problem is that it's a 24/7 access for visitors to the site. The proponent's original proposal was that there were no requirement for parking, so they applied for 85% less parking on site than is usually required in the circumstances. Their proposal was that backpackers don't have cars. In Fremantle, that is completely obviously not the case. They all park in Essex Street and Suffolk Street and Marine Terrace and Norfolk Street. And so no vehicle parking is an anomaly because people come to Perth to drive somewhere else to go on an expedition. They don't rock up in a plane and hang about. So that's part of the problem.
Katrina, I'm going to have to ask you to
I'll just finish up here.
conclude.
Sure. So in summary, our concerns are that the heritage was overlooked, completely omitted from the consideration. The amenity of the overlooking of 7 to 17 Essex Street and 8-15 Essex Street was completely omitted, that their private gardens, the only outdoor area they have, are overlooked by the 4-storey addition. There is no reason in the view of the advice we've had that the optional application of an extra floor or the absence of parking should in any way be allowed for this development, because it does nothing other than reduce the costs to the developer. It does not help the amenity of the site, and it has not in any way addressed the amenity of the neighbours, the residential neighbours nearby, which are critical to Fremantle's diversity. If it becomes a place for a drink rather than to live, that'll be the end of Fremantle. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katrina, for the presentation. Members, questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My report, I'm assuming, has been included in your minutes. Thank you.
The next presenter, Philippa Porteous.
Good afternoon. A prison cell in Australia measures on average 2 by 3 metres square. That's for 2 prisoners. The accommodation at 19 Essex Street is wanting to squeeze guests in, so quite unbelievably, this would mean each guest would have far less space than a prison cell. On the first floor, the proposal of 184 pods equates to 2.5 metre squares per person. And don't forget, in a windowless room. What experience will that be for the tourists who visit Fremantle? What is it saying to the world? Come and stay in terrible conditions, even our prisoners have more space. Yes, this might happen in Tokyo, but guests in Japan abide by rules. It does have a very limited space. Perth does not. I run the Port Mill Bed and Breakfast. On average, the room sizes are 20 to 25 square metres for 2 people, not including the ensuite bathroom. So at 19 Essex Street, where will these guests socialise? Because they surely can't in their rooms. My guests have chairs and tables in each room and have a balcony with seating to the outside world. The fact that the guests will not be able to socialise in their minute rooms will only exacerbate the noise problem, as 284 people will have to congregate in a communal space 24/7, totally destroying the neighbours' right of enjoyment of their own homes, many of whom have saved all their lives to buy their special historical property. I am totally against this proposal to develop it into yet another backpackers on Essex Street. The previous submission for an 8-room hotel is far more appropriate. I believe it to be totally inappropriate development for this beautiful historical area of Fremantle, and once this is approved, there's no going back. Other areas of concern, along with many areas of concern voiced here today, is the pick up and drop off of guests to the property. There is no off-street parking for taxis or Ubers to enter to pick up guests, as in the Esplanade Hotel. I needed to get an Uber to the airport and had to wait 5 minutes for me because I wasn't quite ready, and the congestion this caused was terrible. There were cars beeping their horns. Please remember, I'm just one person trying to get an Uber. This is 286 people. As the Backpackers Association says, 50 to 60% of backpackers own a car, and normally backpackers' cars do require more maintenance than most who live in the area. Please think about the neighbours' right to their enjoyment of their properties and urge you not to support this application. Thank you.
Members, questions?
Good, thank you.
Presenter Benedict McCarthy.
Left and right.
Yeah, that's it.
Good afternoon. My name is Benedict McCarthy. I'm the Director for Planning Horizons and been engaged by a landowner at 17 Essex Street. Fortunately, we are also the original designer and planning consultancy who got the approval for the 8-bedroom hotel on the subject site, which I assume this has been based on. Some of the differences in what our approval covered. Oh, these are reasons for a strong objection, which you've already, most have already been discussed. This is the initial application that we made back in 2019. We thought it'd be appropriately addressed with sailing and boats and sort of the pitched roof that was familiar with the area. After lengthy and rigorous negotiation with the DRP and the City of Fremantle Council, it was determined that something like this would be more appropriate. So this is our secondary proposal of the development, which is, as you can note, 2-storey. The ground floor is for car parking and maintenance vehicle access as well, and also storage, which is very important, that lacks in this current proposal. That didn't quite hit the mark, so we then came to a final permutation of this development, which is 2-storey, 8 bedrooms. The top floor has a very discreet rooftop terrace. There's no actual accommodation up the top there, and of course we provided 13 or 14 car bays as well as a waste disposal as well. Very sympathetic to the area. We did acknowledge the overshadowing of the adjoining properties and the impact in terms of building bulk, vehicle access, noise, and they're all these items were addressed. Our concern is under the current proposal, none of these have been addressed, and in fact they've just taken this from an approval that was just only 4 years old, given it a shot of steroids, and really kind of put it over the top without really respecting what the area requires and what the area deserves as well. So that, in summary, that is what it looks like from Norfolk Street. Again, quite discreet and much more sympathetic to the area than the current proposal. The setbacks have been increased from the southern boundary and the western boundary, providing neighbours privacy, good visual articulation, and of course the overshadowing and the impact of the building bulk as well has been significantly lower than what is actually being proposed in this current application. That's a quick summary of what we had approved and what is now being proposed. And in a short space of just 4 years, our question is, neither the built environment planning strategy or development guidelines in the West End have changed dramatically since 2020. So why is the proposed development considered to be acceptable to the city when just 4 years ago our approved design was a maximum size building acceptable for this site? I would also like to add that we were congratulated by the DRP and the council as well for our design after quite a lengthy process. So our concern is raised what happened to the standards that were quite stringent and quite held up 4 years ago, and why they've been relaxed today. That is the summary of our objection. Thank you.
Thank you, Benedict. Members, questions?
Just wondered, with the approved design, did that also incorporate the buildings facing onto Essex Street?
No, it didn't.
Manner. So
No.
they were kept quite separate. So your hotel design was going to be accessed from the right of way And that's how people would get to reception and they get to their rooms. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was completely freestanding. There was no connection to the existing building. It was going to be quite digitalised in that there would be you'd given an access code to get access to the building and then to your room as well. So it was going to be it's similar to the one hotel, I think it is, with the sea containers around the corner, that sort of level of hotel.
So no reception? Or...
No reception at all. No. Limited staff to obviously, take care of amenities and so forth, but it was simply 8 bedrooms, spacious bedrooms with good size ensuite. And it was also designed to be budget conscious, so there was not the cost of having staff there constantly and so forth. Whereas this current proposal with a bar and 280 odd guests at any time, there's obviously a huge staff component as well to keep a place like that sort of running as well.
The hotel was purely hotel, no communal facilities for cooking or anything of that kind. Okay, thank you very much.
You may not be able to answer this, but I'll pose a question. So, has the planning framework changed since the earlier proposal was approved?
Not that I understand, no. The scheme certainly hasn't. You might be able to speak a little bit more.
That's okay.
For me, but
focus question.
No, it hasn't. It's still very much the same, and the strategy is still very much the same as well in terms of what is intended for that western end. Yes.
So it would seem, based on the information, the RAR, the planning scheme requirements, and it is a question I'll put to the city's officers, allows 3-storey buildings.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, so we did discuss that through the DRP about having a 3rd story, but we communally felt that it was probably too excessive, particularly on a rear block. If it was facing onto the street, onto Essex Street, we could completely understand that. It had a lesser impact on the neighbours at Norfolk, but that car park is very, very tight. It's probably a bit hard to, tell just how tight that car park is without visiting it. There's not a lot of space there. So our approach was something that was more discreet, and then with the rooftop terrace, allow those guests to have like a very unique experience, which you could see over the top of Fremantle, watch the sunset, through the Norfolk pines down at the Esplanade, and have something really quite special without bastardising the area, so to speak. So that was the whole integrity behind what we actually proposed, and that's why we got it approved, because it was something that was very suitable for the area.
I remember the development didn't obviously go ahead.
No.
So what was the background to that decision?
Pretty much COVID hit. We got it approved in 2020, and then obviously for the next 2 years everything went very, very quiet. There were a number of issues with drainage on the site as well that affected number 17 Essex Street. There was very poor drainage on site, which I think I touched on one of our submissions, and that would then pour through the limestone and constantly used to flood the underground car park at number 17. So whenever there's a heavy downpour, 17 Essex Street would get flooded purely from the permeability of the 160-year-old limestone. We spent quite a bit of time and effort trying to resolve that, which I believe we resolved to a degree. To a degree. And that's our concern as well. When construction happens, this is a very fragile building next door at number 17, and building that close is going to have some pretty significant impacts. And when it does, there's no going back. You can't just prop up a building that are old and repair it. It will have some long-term damage.
Thanks for your answer.
No.
Did you have a...
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So the next presenter is it Kira?
That's right, the 4 of us from the project team will join together with one presentation and share our allocated time together.
Sitting along the end, try and get as many as we can.
Maybe just start from where the screen is.
Okay. I'll start.
So who's going to lead off?
I'll do that.
Okay. Now, there's 4 presenters. You'll have 3 minutes. I'm happy for you to work out 12 minutes, but as I did with the other presenters, if it is up 12, I'll let you know.
So yeah, that'll be appreciated. We can combine the 12 minutes together, and we have one presentation.
And then we'll ask questions as a group.
That'd be great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time today. My name's Kira. I'm the planning consultant from Developed. I'm joined by Tim from Lilo, the hotel operator, Isabel, the heritage consultant from Urbis, and we also have Rocky London project architects in attendance as well. To start with the planning considerations, I'd like to just provide a quick summary. We have an experienced team. Lilo are part of a wider experienced hotel group, and an established West Australian project team was put together. The application went through a pre-lodgement process with the city prior to finalising the plans for lodgement. The project focused on adaptive reuse, so the heritage and sustainability benefits that are provided by reusing the existing building. The height is consistent with the upper limits allowable under the local planning scheme. The heritage component was supported by the city's heritage staff as well as the Heritage Council. The design and built form was supported by the city's Design Advisory Committee prior to us finalising and launching the plans. Land use, we do feel that the tourism development is highly appropriate for this location. The site is zoned city centre, both under the Metropolitan Region scheme as well as under the local planning scheme. So an appropriate location for tourism development, we believe, and also activation. The presence of tourists, particularly tourists in a facility like this that aren't driving door to door, provides a number of activation benefits to the city centre. So just moving on to recommended reasons for refusal. We do acknowledge and thank the city's planning team for working with us through the application and supporting the application, and recommending to council that it be supported for approval. However, we do acknowledge that council resolved not to support the application and has provided some recommendations for refusal, which we'll touch on. Firstly, the first reason was with regard to building height, and in particular the 4-storey extension at the rear. As I noted, the building height is consistent with the allowable limit under the planning scheme, which allows for up to 4 storeys and 14 metres if the 4th storey is set back from the street, which it has been. And you would note in the RAR, the Responsible Authority report from the assessing planning officer, they have determined that height to be compliant. Not sure if you can see the text there. Also within the RAR, there's a numerous commentary from the Heritage Assessment and Heritage Officer, which is supportive of the built form and doesn't raise any concerns with the impact of this new proposal on the heritage character of the locality. Just going on to the next reason, which was particularly regards to the impacts of amenity of neighbouring properties. We have considered that during preparation of the plan, certainly. As I noted, the built form is within its allowable limits. The design has also considered streetscape, the site context and surrounding built form. Some of the built form diagrams that are presented by the planning team within that RAR shows that there is only really a modest amount of built form that is observable from surrounding streets. Amenity has also been considered with regard to overshadowing and overlooking. Carly will touch on that more in her presentation with regards to built form, but certainly all of those things were considered in the development of the plan, and understanding the surrounding context and surrounding land uses certainly was given regard and discussed with the city's planning officers as the plans were prepared. With regard to car parking, recommended reason for refusal, we do acknowledge that that is a variation from the local planning scheme standard. However, we do feel it is acceptable in this location. It is a city centre site. It is a tourism development. It is particularly targeted at a more affordable market and a younger market where there is this need for cars. Based on Lilo's experience elsewhere in Australia and New Zealand, these are international and interstate guests that are arriving, not driving across Australia necessarily, but arriving at the airport and not hiring cars and staying in Fremantle with a car. They are able to walk around, they're able to use public transport, they're able to use Uber. The same if we went over to Melbourne or Sydney for a weekend, there's alternative transport, certainly a wide range of alternative transport in the area. There's also a wide range of public parking in the area for those people that do have a car with them. However, we note that people that are hiring vans and those types of travellers that are travelling wider afield are not staying at a venue like this. They are just staying in their van. So it's a different type of traveller that's owning cars, we feel. And the final reason, recommended reason for refusal is to do with waste, particularly the collection from Norfolk Lane. Norfolk Lane is predominantly a service lane, and as noted previously, that is where waste is currently being collected. A waste management plan was prepared and reviewed by the city and has been, the plans themselves and the waste management plan have been amended in response to the city's requirements. as we noted, it will be a 24-hour operation, so there are staff on site that will be able to manage the bins. We are required under the waste management plan to store those on site within the bin storage area. That's it for me within my time allowed, so we'll move on to Tim, if that's all right.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So my name is Tim Alp. I'm the Managing Director of Lilo, based in Auckland, New Zealand. I really want to do two things in this 3 minutes that I have available. One is to give you a better overview on Lilo as a product, of what we are and what we do and what we bring to the city, and also why we chose Fremantle, and specifically why we chose 19 Essex Street. So Lilo, it's quite difficult to describe. We're a hybrid. So we're not a hostel, we're not a hotel, we're not a B&B. We're sort of a combination of all, really. And that's kind of how we've designed the property, and very much around communal travel. So communal areas are really important in our property, whether it's communal kitchens, whether it's an F&B offering or hangout spaces. It's designed to get people together. And we range customers from 18 to 80. As you would see from some of these images here, we have very much designer-led. I describe us as we have a design of a hotel, but the personality of a hostel is kind of the way that we sort of described it. So we are located across New Zealand. We have 3 properties, Auckland, Christchurch and Queenstown. Our Auckland property, for example, has been open for 18 months now. It's the most booked property hotel in the city by room night of any hotel. So the concept that we've got is very much attractive to a whole range of customers, not just your 18 to 35-year-old backpackers. We have 3 properties in New Zealand. We have opened a property in Brisbane 6 months ago, and we have DA approval for one on the Gold Coast, and obviously the project that we're doing here in Fremantle. In terms of Fremantle, why Fremantle? It was really a top on the hit list for us. We love the fact that our customers want to come to Fremantle. We believe the city itself is underrepresented in terms of budget, affordable accommodation. So that was really important for us. And we also saw the city was very proactive in encouraging innovative new types of accommodation into the city. And I think, again, the DA approval back in 2020 at the rear of the site just again showed that there was a desire for development, a desire to encourage more people to come in. We think it's a perfect location. We are part of EVT, which is a public company which owns the Esplanade and Bridges, the QT Hotel in town here. So we're part of a big company, so we have experience in the Fremantle market. And that was really important in terms of the car parking question that was raised before. In any of our properties here, we don't provide car parking. We work with local car. If there is a need for car parking, which there can be, we work with lots of local car parks around the area, exactly the same as what Bridges does down the road in terms of their property. For us, it's about encouraging our guests to get out into the market. So we want them to get out and use the bars, use the restaurants. So that's why it's really important that we are located. That's why 19 Essex Street is perfect from a location perspective, because it's a commercial zone. You're right near all the bars and all the restaurants and all the areas, and they want to walk out there. And sustainability is a big reason for us. So this property that we're looking at is a commercial building, which we can redevelop. We're not knocking it down. We're not starting again. We're redeveloping and repurposing, and that's really important for us. And then to provide a lot of alternative accommodation options with bikes, scooters, that sort of thing that we're looking to introduce. So really, I mean, we're really excited about Fremantle. We think this product would be amazing in terms of bringing more people into Fremantle and encouraging more greater budget accommodation to the city.
I will remind you, you're just over half. So
thank you.
As the primary author of the Heritage Impact Statement, which accompanied the DA, I'd like to set out the reasons why the proposal is capable of being supported on the basis of our Heritage Impact Analysis, which was in accordance with the Officer and DAC recommendations. The HIS was written in accordance with DPLH's guidelines, which assess the proposed development against the established heritage significance of the subject site, part of the former Mills and Co building, and the central Fremantle area. Adjacent state heritage listed places, including 26 to 28 Norfolk Street and the Fremantle Technical College, were also assessed as part of this Heritage Impact Statement. Prior to DA lodgement, the project team had positive discussions with the city's heritage coordinator and the planning officer. This was confirmed in the officer's report, which concluded that the proposed 4-storey accommodation block is located at the rear of the site and will not directly affect any significant heritage fabric at 19 Essex Street or adjoining heritage places. The city's DAC was also supportive in relation to the development's approach to context and character. The proposal was referred to the Heritage Council based on the proximity to Port Flour Mill, 26 to 28 Norfolk Street, and a limestone wall on the shared boundary. Written advice from the Heritage Council concluded that the proposal will not affect the cultural significance of the adjacent properties, and they recommended conditions for ameliorating any possible impacts during the construction. RHA has found that the proposed changes to 19 Essex Street are in line with the Australian Ichabos Borough Charter principles and will not impact the site's noted significant heritage fabric. The new work is identifiable as such and respects the scale, form and materiality of the surrounding heritage context and is reversible without causing any physical damage. The proposed additions are not visible from the main frontage and will blend into the background with limited visibility from secondary streetscapes, thus not impacting the Fremantle Central Heritage Area's context or character. There are no discernible impacts to the neighbouring state heritage listed sites, the Technical College, and a minor visual impact to 26 to 28 Norfolk Street. This will be mitigated by the large setback and the diverse streetscape of Norfolk Street. These conclusions were supported by the City's Heritage Coordinator, the DAC, and the Heritage Council's written advice. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this proposal.
Thank you very much. I'm Kylie Schoonens. I'm the principal of Rothman Roman. I'll flick through. I'm really conscious of time. Obviously, Tim's spoken about what we're actually delivering here, and we really do believe that we are creating a quality short stay accommodation development that really focuses on hospitality, the living outside of the rooms, as well as the communal spaces that we're creating. Just touching on the built form, I should stress that the existing the site was actually bought with a 4-storey DA in place. There is actually, rather than being a 2-storey, there's actually a 4-storey lift shaft on the boundary to the east. And we worked within the existing built form envelope that was actually provided as a part of that process. We've also pulled it in further on the eastern boundary to provide more less impact onto the properties on 24, 26, 28 and 22 Norfolk Street. 77% of the allowable development footprint has not been adjusted. That we've built within the existing building footprint, and we've only worked on 23% of the allowable building footprint. So we were by right able to look to redevelop the entire building. We wanted to respect that and keep that within the allowable built form. You can actually see that through here as well. And what we've actually looked to do is celebrate the existing architecture. We're repairing the street of the 2012 extension that was actually done on the front, the foreground building through there, which is adjacent to 17 Norfolk Street, which was built in the 1990s. So we've actually pulled that back through there. You can actually see again through here how we've actually pulled that built form back. As my team have explained, we've been really cognizant from all 3 streets how it's actually been pulled back, and it's actually the minimal impact. You can actually see through here the top solar access is what the impact would have been if we had have built completely to the allowable planning control footprint. What you can see below that with the blue and then the light blue around it is what the actual impact is. So we've actually pulled it back in, set back. There is actually less of an impact of overshadowing on what we're proposing compared to what might be if it was a fully compliant built form. You can see here through privacy, we've actually got the pod rooms are built and contained within the existing roof structure through there. The new darker colour on the back is the en-suited rooms, and we've actually provided privacy screens that are facing the views towards the commercial properties away from the residential properties. So they actually won't be overlooking, and in fact, a minimal number of residential apartments and only 2 rooms you can see facing to the east as well. You can see here through the massing impact, again, we've taken into account the allowable compliant built form.
I would have to ask you to conclude.
Thanks, Tony. I'll be very quick. So you can actually see through here in terms of the sectional impact, this is one of my last slides, the impact that you can actually see with the visual and how we've ameliorated that space, and the summary through there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Members, questions of any of the team?
First, it's a quick question for the operator of Lilo. I just wondered how this development compares to your existing facility, sort of number of bedrooms, size of bedrooms, and also the amount of park. Oh, you said you could address parking, so I'll take that away, but also the size of the communal living areas.
So just the size of the communal.
Yes, and number and size actually of.
Yeah, so this is a similar size to what we're doing in the Gold Coast, and smaller than what we've done in Auckland. In terms of the size of our pods, so which is the communal area, we have pods which are 2 meters long, 1 meter wide, and we've got them in the rooms. The room sizes are very similar. You can talk to the size of the communal area. So very similar, exactly the same in terms of the size of the rooms and the communal spaces. The big important thing for us is to have multiple areas, because you're right, no one wants to hang out in their pod all day. So we want to get people out into Fremantle, but also when they are on the property, multiple communal areas for which they are able to hang out.
All right, thank you.
So if I can just extend on that. So we actually looked at trying to create very defined neighbourhoods within the site. So we have the streets, we have the communal meeting place, which we're actually reusing the existing building fabric. There's a great skylight that runs through the middle of the site. That's actually used as a meeting place outside the rooms, but then the entire ground floor is actually given over to communal space. The whole idea of the Lilo brand is it's creating a neighbourhood, a community where people come to meet outside of their rooms.
Co-working, co-living,
exactly.
Wellness, yoga, that sort of thing.
We've actually focused a lot of time on the interiors of that space, creating identities for each of the zones, and it moves from I guess public interface on the street to maximise street activation and looking at even people who come to visit Fremantle can come and have a meal at the front, but it moves into more of the private guest only areas further back into the space.
That's it.
Councillor Sullivan.
Thanks, presiding member. I just wanted to ask a question about, I guess, the general approach to development on the site, particularly in terms of where to put the new build and whether any consideration was given about putting some of the new build over the existing buildings. Obviously, there's a new building and an old building. So heritage may have been an issue in some of that, but not necessarily all of that. So was there any consideration or any reason why some of the building bulk, if you like, couldn't have been extended more towards Essex Street? Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. We absolutely did test that as an idea through the design process. As a team, we workshopped a number of options. But if you can appreciate that I guess the heritage component of the built form sits on the northern side of the site, and the new build, the 2012, sits on the southern side of the site. So in actual fact, we would have been creating more shadow impact on our neighbours by creating a long, extra large built form and building that up. Not only that, we were really conscious about sustainability. We wanted to maintain as much of a minimal carbon footprint as possible. And so we actually looked at how do we create not only the best outcome for the smaller amount of shadow that we're actually creating for our neighbours. We admit that, this is going to create a shadow, but we wanted to minimise the impact of that, and we wanted to maximise the amount of sustainable approach we take to the building.
The question is probably a question to Tim. You've heard some of the views from community members today, and there seems to be a sense that the site's been overdeveloped. You've talked about the philosophy of Lilo. I just more specifically this site in terms of it's not narco, but the sort of density of development and related to height. Can you sort of talk about just the general philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, the philosophy, as I sort of alluded to before, is really much around the community living. And so you're staying in your pods, one thing, and giving affordable, low-cost operated, but it's actually getting people out into the environment as well. So thus there is a number of people, high number of people in the property, but it's all designed around getting out into the property and getting out of the property into the local area, eating at the restaurants, going to the bars, going to the activities around the area. So when we looked at it, we do have a number of people in the property, so that's it, and in the pod rooms, and in the ensuite rooms as well. But the philosophy is that actually you don't spend much time in your room.
No, sorry. The question was probably around the intensity of development.
Oh, yeah, in terms of the size-wise?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's similar to what we currently offer in other properties as well, in terms of number of beds to square meterage, size-wise.
Okay. So it's a commercial consideration, is it?
It's a commercial consideration, and when we saw what we could do on the site, look, we don't want to have a site which is overrun with people. It's not the desire for us. We've got still an experience. We're going to have an experience which fits within the brand that we're operating in. We believe the site that's there at the moment and the density within that site is very much acceptable based on what we've already done in other locations that we currently operate in at the moment. Yeah. So we're not concerned about that, but it is a commercial consideration.
Thank you. I've got quite a few, but I'll just ask one or two and then see how we go and maybe come back if they're not all answered. It's probably one for Kylie. In terms of privacy and overlooking, that's been a key concern from local residents, adjacent neighbours, and how they live there, and obviously their back gardens, etc. Abut this development. Considerations, yes, I can see you set the upper floor back, but how many actual room windows do potentially orientate towards those outdoor areas of residential?
26 and 28, there's actually none because the screening, I don't know if we can, the screening actually angles the other way.
Right.
So it faces out over the salvos room. So you're actually, we're directing the views away from the building, and the same for on the southern side towards the 17 Norfolk Street. It's actually facing the other way. Oh, Essex, sorry, Essex. Facing the other way. It's facing towards Norfolk Street. And then what we've actually done is the where we've actually set that building in, because we didn't want to have a completely blank wall facing onto the Norfolk Street, so we've actually articulated that through there as well.
And are they operable windows? They're openable windows?
They are. I mean, it's just as important for us from a sustainability. We want to be able to allow the fresh air in and capture the Frio doctor in the afternoons as well. So that's a really important part for us. We don't want to have air conditioning running 24/7.
Okay. What was raised in one of the previous presentations as well was about drainage across the site and into neighbouring sites as well. And obviously some regard to foundations or lack of foundations, as it were, for the adjoining properties. And you've obviously got sort of zero walls in some of that. What approach would be taken to, or have you taken in terms of thinking about the design to consider that drainage and that groundwater flow, and also the stability or the mitigation of any dilapidation?
Yes, so there will be a construction management plan that's undertaken as a part of the works, and we're already talking to a builder, just to get early input to make sure that what we are proposing is sensitive to the neighbouring properties. We've obviously pulled the new built form away from the existing properties, and in actual fact, to your point before, Tony, if we actually had have built to that allowable built form and knocked down some of the existing building, that would have actually had more impact, because obviously the demolition works and removing all that existing built form would have actually probably caused more impact than what we're proposing.
Okay.
Right.
And in terms of the drainage?
And the drainage, it will all be managed. We've got hydraulic consultants on site. We're working with our civil engineers, and we're working through all of those issues.
I just have one more, if I may. And this is probably to yourself. In terms of operational management, again, there has been some concern from what we've heard about people gathering on the street, people having three lots of year 12 leavers, things going on. What's the sort of operational regime there to ensure that there's a reasonable standard of amenity, not for just your occupants, but also for the surrounding neighbourhood?
Yeah, sure. So we have a 24-hour reception, so we are always staffed. So there always is someone there, even though we do utilise technology in terms of check-in, check-out process. It's really important for us to have someone on site. So we do have that, and that kind of manages any sort of issues that may happen. When you are running a business like this, things do happen at times. But it is a very different, as I said, the clientele is very different to what I suppose would be perceived in a traditional backpacker model. We don't price our product that way either, so we get a different type of clientele in there. So operationally, we have staff who are on site 24 hours a day to manage any of that.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
I had a question probably to you, Isabella.
Yeah.
Once again, you've heard comments from other presenters about the heritage value of this local area.
Yeah.
And the adjoining sites.
Yeah.
And there's some real concern that that hasn't been duly considered. Now, you made a comment earlier in your presentation about the Heritage Council
Yeah,
and the fact that they
supported the proposal in
Approved, yeah.
consideration of.
perhaps you can sort of just outline how that was done.
Yeah, so we actually had a pre-application meeting in person with them, or did we send them a letter? Yeah, we did both. And so we presented them with our draft heritage impact statement, and they assessed the proposal internally based on the impact to our site, 19 Essex Street, which is contained within the former Mills & Co heritage listing, as well as the wider, it's now called the Central Fremantle Heritage Area, formerly the West End area. And then they also considered their adjacent state heritage listed sites, which is the Port Flour Mill, which is located at 15 Essex Street, 26 to 28 Norfolk Street, and the limestone wall on the boundary, and the technical college as well. And so they sent us a letter, which basically said that the proposal will not affect the cultural significance of the Port Flour Mill and the Fremantle Technical College, and that the development introduced a new visual element to Norfolk Street, which will be behind 26 to 28 Norfolk Street. It is considered that this will have minimal adverse impact on the cultural heritage values of the place, and that it is supported subject to a dilapidation survey and monitoring of potential vibration and structural movement.
Okay, so sort of from that, in terms of a development group, was there consultation with adjoining owners?
Not from a
other than
perspective,
the
no.
public process?
Only through the public advertising.
Okay, all right. Members, any further questions?
Ask another one, and Leslie's got one on the waste management. I wanted to find out a bit more about that. Waste management raised, and obviously the issue of already been activity on Norfolk Lane, which perhaps is not regulated as much as it should be, but that's not the making of this particular application, that's understood. But could you just explain, it might be useful if you went to one of your drawings and just please explain where the bins will be normally stored through the week, and then where you would put them, and then describe how they would go for collection, and then where they would be put back, and how all of that would be managed. Sure. And if there's any consideration of odour, etc., that has been incorporated into the design.
It's not moving.
Sorry, I've asked the impossible.
Unless you want me to, I've got the plans. I can probably explain, but
that waste management.
We can speak to the plans within the agenda.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
There we go. Hang on. We don't, okay, we can probably here. So this is not the ground plane. This is obviously the area above that, but I mean, I could probably connect it to the plans on the agenda.
Members have copies of the plans in the back.
Yeah, so I guess in the plan, I don't know if you can.
Yeah.
So our bin store is through here. So it's actually managed in the bottom right-hand corner. Yeah. So all bins are contained through here. They will be pulled out through here by staff. When they're emptied, they'll be brought back in again and brought back through here. I guess the biggest difference between the building now and what we're proposing is, as Tim said, there's going to be 24-hour staff on site, and they will be required to do this. They don't have that at the moment. So, we believe that the situation that there is now will obviously be improved by what we're actually proposing, because there will be people that are being paid who are on site 24 hours a day to be able to pull them in and out.
And that's a private collection on Norfolk Lane, or is that for the local government to collect?
We're working through it with local government at this point in time, but if needs be, as a part of the waste collection, it'll be private.
It'll be determined through the waste management plan, and that's in perpetuity through the activity of the development. Okay, thank you.
May I ask a follow-on question from that? How many bins and how many times a week is collection? Like how many times?
3 times a week that we're proposing. I can't remember.
How many bins would be on the lane? Because we can see it's
There is 5 bins.
Yeah.
And a lot within the bin storage area. With the bin storage area was assessed by the city's technical officers and was amended based on what they required. So there's an area for bulk waste as well as recycling and a general rubbish. So that's a total of 5 bins plus a bulk waste area. Yeah. So they are required to be kept in that storage area rather than at present, which the neighbours have pointed out, is that the bins are just kept in the laneway and they get in everyone's way.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have one final question, and I will foreshadow this question to the city's officers. Obviously, the scheme provisions allow for 3 stories, but there's discretion for a 4th floor.
Within the scheme, yes.
Yeah. Provide certain things are met. I said I'm going to foreshadow this question to the city's officers. Can you sort of provide the basis of why you think it meets a scheme provisions?
Certainly, perhaps I'll touch on that, Carlin, if you dare. Yes, so the scheme provisions is basically a base height of 3 stories and then up to 4 stories. The primary consideration for up to 4 stories is for the 4th story to be set back from the street, which in this situation is set back quite well from the street so that it can't be seen. And then there's a number of other objectives, I suppose discretionary guide in terms of looking at how it affects the area in terms of views from the street and amenity considerations and the like. And we do think we have done our best to address all of those in terms of overshadowing, overlooking, within the context of the site being zoned city centre. So we think that the 4 stories is certainly consistent with those provisions set out in the scheme.
And under the site planning controls, there are actually no required setbacks stipulated within the scheme from the sides. So we've actually allowed for that to ensure that we obviously have sufficient side setbacks as well as within the height. So we are within that height control. As I said, we when we were investigating, we actually looked at, do we extend the built form to 4 stories or to 3 stories further towards Essex Street into the new the newer version of the existing building. But when we were doing our shadow diagrams and our studies and working through it all, the actual shadow of what we're proposing moves a lot faster across it and minimises the impact of what we're actually doing compared to if we were actually going to do a much larger and removing a lot of the existing built form fabric. So we looked at what was the least impact, both from both on the built form, on the existing site, on what our neighbours would have, and what we actually needed to do from an environmental and a construction cost efficiency. And this was the best outcome from that.
And that's, like I said, one other sentence, we were obviously guided by the planning team and the heritage team staff and the design advisory committee. We specifically asked those comments prior to finalising the DA and went to design advisory committee prior to lodging the DA so that we could get guidance on the height to make sure the whole team was comfortable with it.
Which they approved, obviously, as a part of that process.
Okay. All right. Members, if there's no final questions, the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We move to the City of Fremantle offices, and now we've got Chloe Johnson there. Do we also have Jonathan Dorner?
John's with me in the room. He's observing, but I'll be answering any questions from the panel today, member.
Yep. Chloe, before we go to questions, did you want to make any comment based on what you've heard this afternoon?
No, thank you, presiding member. I'm happy to address any questions of the panel.
Okay, all right. Members, questions of the city officers?
Well, I suppose it's the question that you're probably going to be asking about. What is different about this proposal, what has previously been approved in terms of height? And yeah, only that issue for me at the moment.
Sure. The previous proposal that was approved was only marginally shorter than this one is proposed. I guess the difference with the top floor was that the top floor of the previous approval was a much smaller footprint, and it was a roof deck with a roof covering and lift overrun, as opposed to being a full fourth floor. So previous proposal had car park, 2 floors of accommodation, and then a roof deck. So it was about a metre and a half shorter than what this proposal is.
Okay. Chloe, I foreshadowed a question around that 4th level. The RAR does include consideration. Perhaps if you could go through those in terms of why the RAR comments are that it meets the scheme requirements.
Yeah, so the scheme for this site, presiding member, is that there's a maximum height of 3 stories for development in this local planning area. That is contingent on meeting a number of criteria. To get the additional 4th story, it is also contingent on that criteria, including being set back from the street. So as is set out in the RAR, we've had to have a look at the building heights of the surrounding area, including along Norfolk Street and Essex Street, given that this addition is sort of in between 2 street blocks. Looking at the amenity of the adjoining properties, part of that is obviously reviewing the fabric on site and hearing from our design advisory committee. Also looking at conservation objectives, so the heritage impact of the surrounding area and specifically those listed properties. Our heritage architect has provided that heritage impact statement, as we do have also comments from the Heritage Council that confirm that those buildings of significance haven't been significantly impacted, and the conservation objectives of those places are maintained. And I guess the other elements of the planning policies in the area. So stepping through that criteria, look, we believe the siting and the scale of this addition is appropriate for the site. In terms of being set back from the street, it is sufficiently set back and meeting that requirement as outlined by the scheme from Essex Street as well. So there is elements for the panel to consider in terms of awarding that maximum and additional height. And in our view, they've met that criteria.
Right, thank you. Just leading on from that, obviously the RAR recommendation is primarily based around amenity impacts. And you've heard this afternoon that there's a significant number of presenters that think there are amenity impacts in terms of noise, overshadowing, and general nuisance. And we've heard from the applicant a different position. So in terms of the RAR assessment of those sort of considerations like noise, traffic, waste, the conclusion is that those things aren't significant impacts.
Yeah, so that would be correct. We have recommended in the officer recommendation at the end of the report that a number of those matters either require management plans or additional information. So, for example, the impact of amenity being privacy, we have asked that be dealt with. While we acknowledge there is some information on the plans to try and deal with that, it's not quite clear how that privacy is dealt with. We've requested an operational management plan just to clarify and hold the applicant to the proposals for 24-hour staffing and management of complaints and noise. There is an acoustic report that the applicant's provided that shows an intention to comply with the noise regulations. And there's also a waste management plan as well that has been provided and is conditioned as well. So we feel that through the imposition of some of the conditions relating to the final working drawings, as well as the ongoing management of the premises, that the matters have been dealt with, albeit that we recognise that there is going to be an impact on the surrounding residents. We feel that what the applicant has proposed is appropriate.
All right, thank you. Members, any other questions?
No, I think I'm good.
Nope. Okay. Chloe, thank you for your response. So members, we now actually move to the item, and we have a recommendation in the RAR to refuse the application for a number of reasons. I just refer back to that. Okay, so it's a recommendation for refusal. Is someone prepared to move the recommendation?
Prepared to move that, presiding member.
Councillor Sullivan. Is there a seconder for the motion in the RAR? Councillor Van Dawson. Councillor Sullivan, did you want to talk to the motion?
Thanks, presiding member. I just wanted to go through, I guess, four elements, but before I do that, I do want to make a couple of positive statements about the proposal, because I think it's important to acknowledge what elements do tick the planning boxes, but then also consider where the proposal actually fails the scheme. From a land use point of view, I think this type of development is both highly desirable in the city centre zone of Fremantle and is the sort of land use that is envisaged by the scheme, notwithstanding that it is a fairly predominant residential area. It is still a mixed use zone. It is still a city centre zone. And I think in that sense, the land use, the type of operation, the fact that it's different to other backpackers and other types of tourist accommodation and all of those elements is a positive. I also would say that it took me a while to really understand the nature of a pod style development. I'm sure it's new to most people, but at the end of the day, thinking about the way some of the other backpackers in the area operate, I think I'd probably prefer to stay in this one than some of the other ones. So I'm sure a lot of people would have that kind of view about its amenity, notwithstanding that it is a little bit hard to get your mind around so many rooms that don't have windows, albeit they have access to natural light and ventilation. The other thing I would like to say before I get into the reasons why I think the refusal has strong merit is in relation to the adjoining heritage listed mill. Now, while the mill is certainly the 1860s part of it is critically important from a state and local heritage perspective, I think everyone needs to understand that the vast majority of the building that abuts the development site that we're looking at is a new build from the 1990s, and the basement that was built in that area required a lot of excavation along the boundary line of the two properties, and is not an old build. It's a new build, and so most of the new building on this proposed site doesn't directly abut the heritage part of the adjoining site, and I think that's important when we look at any development on that site. But the reasons for refusal for me are very much about the built form of the rear of the building, very much about what the local planning scheme requires. So if you look at the starting points that have been discussed, the West End sub-area 1.3.1, yes, it is true that the maximum height, the standard sort of maximum height in that area is 3 stories or 11 metres, but it must be emphasised that that the decision maker must also have due regard to clause 1.2. So the notion that 3 stories is an automatic as of right is simply untrue. It has to have due regard to the elements in 1.2. And I think this development fails to do that. I'll come back to that a little bit later. So then we go to the notion of being able to have a 4th story. So the council may, there's no absolute, the council or the decision maker may approve a 4th story subject to a number of conditions. The first one is not visible from the adjoining, the streets adjoining the site. And while this development isn't visible from Essex Street, it is visible from Norfolk Lane, and it is visible from Norfolk Street. Now, there is conjecture, I guess, as to whether they qualify as adjoining streets that adjoin the site. I would argue that Norfolk Lane, that the only way this site is developed in this way is because of its direct connection via a right-of-way, via an easement to Norfolk Lane. That will forever be an open space accessing this site. So for me, it does have direct visual connection to Norfolk Lane, and that the requirement of that part of the clause should be applied to Norfolk Lane. The other part that the Norfolk Street issue of being able to see quite a bulky building from Norfolk Street because the buildings there are predominantly single story is an important issue, but I think that comes more under the other clauses that are referred to in the scheme. So yes, there can be a maximum height of 14 metres, but I don't think it passes the tests that are required to be passed in terms of its setback. And in any case, as I said, the first part of the scheme, in terms of 3 stories, requires us to look at clause 1.2 of the scheme. And I would argue very strongly that that is trying to ensure that there is transitioning between the existing built form, and particularly any heritage built form in the area, and any new development. It is there to actually say to the decision maker that in a lot of cases, yeah, 3 stories as of right is probably perfectly acceptable, except in those cases in the West End where the existing built form is not already of that form. And there are a number of places in the West End, particularly at this sort of southern end of the West End, where there are a lot of single-story older buildings and 2-story older buildings. And there was a map, I think, presented by one of the objectors where they very clearly showed that in the street block, all of the buildings surrounding this development are 1 and 2 stories. The only taller buildings are the ones on the other side of Norfolk Lane and the like. So the area is predominantly 1 and 2 story. And some of those buildings are heritage listed both at the state level and at the local level. And I think what we need to do and what the scheme is trying to do is to say that they need to be protected, not to suggest that you can't have a taller building on this development site, but that there does need to be a transitioning of the built form from one site to another. And that transitioning would include setbacks. It would probably also include materiality changes to make sure that it actually fits into the predominant scale of the area. It's also about, does it fit into the desired scale of the area as well? The scheme also talks about that. And of course, when you're talking about a heritage area, the desired scale of the area is pretty much the same thing as the predominant existing scale of the area, because that's what you're trying to protect. So with regard to the other parts of clause 1.2, it also has to be ensured, so 1.2b, that the proposal is not detrimental to the amenity of the adjoining neighbours, some of which, or in fact most of which, to the south, to the Norfolk Street side, are residential properties, so perhaps even more so in terms of amenity. And while I think things like overlooking can be addressed, and I note what the applicant said, I don't think the proposal as it stands really passes the shadow tests and the bulk and scale tests in terms of the presentation of amenity to the adjoining properties, particularly the Norfolk Street ones. And that is why so many of the people in those areas are up in arms. I have less concern, I have to say, about the impact on the old flour mill, the adjoining area. I understand the concern that is raised by the residents who will lose a significant amount of their sky as such, the sky view. But I'm a little bit less concerned about that than I am from the Norfolk Street presentation. And clearly the 4-story, I mean, if the previous development was required to be restricted to 3 stories with a 4-story setback by the exact same scheme and the exact same kind of planning assessment, I'm a little bit unsure as to why we would now be considering setting all of that aside and having a 4-story building pretty well on that boundary. The other part of 1.2c says that it has to be consistent with the conservation objectives for the area. Now, as I said, if the existing heritage buildings are 1 and 2 story, that pretty much suggests to me that while taller buildings can be imposed into that area, they do need to transition and be respectful to those 1 and 2 story buildings. And I think that's why the National Trust also had those concerns. I note that the Heritage Council of WA stated that they didn't have concerns, but bear in mind that the Heritage Council of WA really deals with the state level listing, and perhaps they weren't as focused on the local heritage that we should be looking at. So as I said, council may impose, it says this in the scheme, may impose a lesser height in the event that the proposal does not satisfy clause 1.2a, b, or c. And I think there would be indeed some argument to suggest that it should impose a lesser height, that the decision makers should impose a lesser height. Having said that, there is already an approval on the books for 3 stories, and that is why I think the reasons for refusal are basically saying it should be brought back to that sort of scale of the 3 stories. It clearly has been approved previously with 3 stories with a 4-story setback. And as I said in my question to the applicant, the development site is actually very, very large, and only a part of the site, less than 50%, probably around about 40%, actually includes a heritage building on it. There is no reason in my mind why a similarly intensive development couldn't be developed on the site without pushing all of the bulk and scale to the very back of the property. I just want to touch quickly, if I may, presiding member, on the issue of parking and waste. The notion that backpackers don't have parking. Now, I've worked and lived in the West End on and off for the last 30 years or more. And the reality is, in fact, I have an office right next to a backpackers. Of all of the types of tourism accommodation in the West End of Fremantle, it is the backpacker style accommodation that has the most parking impact on the area for a number of reasons. They are longer stay people. They're not there for a very short period of time. They do tend to stay sometimes for many weeks, even months. They are often arriving and staying for a while, working in the town for a while, which is great. Putting together their vans and their 4-wheel drives, actually fitting them out. So they need to be close to where they are. And to be honest, they also flout the parking rules because most or many of them are foreigners, and they've all worked out that you don't actually have to worry about parking fines because there's no real way for the system to catch up with them as long as they leave within a year or so, and particularly if they have license plates that are not West Australian. So the parking issue is actually significant, and I would argue that while the site is small, it should be trying to optimize or maximize the available land that currently exists for parking for those purposes and not taking away parking that currently already exists. And the last one, the waste management. I know that the council staff have said that it might be possible to approve the way they're proposing. But I would also point out that the council has already requested to the staff some time back to please shift away from allowing rubbish bins to be brought out into the street and left there for 24 hours for pickup, and to actually start making sure that every commercial development has their waste disposal area on site, and that the bins are brought out if and when the truck arrives. And so the notion of bringing bins out to the street is really something that can't continue to happen in Fremantle, and it is an area that will be changing. So I'm very concerned that they get make sure that they get that right. So on all of those grounds, presiding member and panel, I urge you to not support the development in its current form, and I urge the developers to come back with a modified proposal, which I think can achieve the type of development that they're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. Councillor Van Dawson.
Thank you. Yes, I actually agree with everything Andrew said. So to save time, I won't go over it all. So thank you, Andrew. You've literally addressed everything I've had in my notes. But yes, strongly support the use. And coming into this, I did have some reservations around the design and intensity of development. I really appreciate the is it Managing Director of LILO coming in, and also the design team for clarifying those issues, because it actually looks like a great concept. So thank you for presenting today. And yeah, I would love to see you in Fremantle. I agree it's a great location for you and would offer some affordable and diversity option in our tourist development in the city. So agree, great location, great use. But yeah, I cannot support the current proposal in its current form. I'm just not satisfied that it's met those discretionary criteria that would allow for the fourth story. So and Andrew has been through those objectives one by one, so I won't repeat that. But yeah, just on balance, I feel like the negatives of the proposal don't outweigh the positives. So yeah, really appreciate your application proposal, but I'm not able to support it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van Dawson. Is anyone opposed to the motion?
No, you go. Thoughts about this? I've got some concerns with the motion to refuse, quite honestly. And having heard from the applicant, I do realise that there are many sensitivities around this particular application, but I think there has been many steps and in consultation with the city officers to mitigate the majority, if not all, of those impacts. I have concerns with the way that the refusal is worded, particularly that reference to refusing it as appropriate for consideration as a tourist development land use, when clearly that's what it is. And compatibility with the objectives of the City of Fremantle, it being a city centre and one of a regional nature. I understand the elected members' points of view. They've been very clearly articulated. However, I think there are a number of different ways to approach consideration of the development, rather than in this location, rather than as I was interpreting the reasons for refusal, that really there was a preference for a status quo in this area. And I think that would be sadly to the detriment of Fremantle. So I think encouraging change in a way that can be seen to meet the requirements of the scheme and the policies, and have consideration of the surrounding development, and meet a niche within the tourist market would be a more appropriate way to go. So I'm actually quite comfortable with the officer's recommendation, which is at the back of the Responsible Authority report, and I won't be supporting the refusal.
Thank you. So will you be foreshadowing an alternative?
I can do.
Okay.
I concur with those comments made by my fellow panel member. I acknowledge concerns of the residents. I do, but this is a city centre zone. I think this is an appropriate land use. I think this is a very innovative and different model. However, I think there are some issues around perhaps bulk and scale and height at the rear. Waste management appears to be an issue. I'm actually thinking in terms of seeking a deferral of the item for a period of 120 days so that the applicant can go back and have a look at those particular outstanding issues.
I'm very sorry. I had to clarify something.
That's okay, fine.
Yeah. So you're foreshadowing
A deferral.
Okay.
I would hate to refuse this application outright, and then it will go to SAT and it will go through the particular process. I think that a deferral is would be far more beneficial and allow these outstanding, well, some of these outstanding issues to hopefully be resolved.
So are you looking to move a procedural motion?
I am, yes.
Okay, to defer it?
Yes.
Have you?
For a period of 120 days to address issues, concerns raised about bulk and scale, height and waste management.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that procedural motion?
Andrew.
Councillor Sullivan, you're supporting that motion to defer?
Yes, I would support that.
Okay. All right. Because it is a procedural motion, there's no debate. So I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour? Opposed? Okay. The motion to defer is carried. So we will move through the balance of the agenda. Item 4, Form 2 applications, we have nil. Item 5, SAT reconsiderations, we have nil. Part C is other business, SAT applications and Supreme Court appeals. They're listed on the agenda. Item 2, general business. Members, any general business? In which case, thank you everyone for participating in the meeting, and I declare the meeting closed at 2:52.